Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I'm the events coordinator for Library Juice. And today we are talking about holistic management in libraries. I am going to share a couple of slides so that I can talk about all the things that Library Juice has going on. We have three big arms, the first of which is Library Juice Academy, where we do online professional development for everybody in the information studies field. So for librarians, archivists, paraprofessionals, all of us, this is a chance for us to learn all the things that we might not have learned in library school and archive school and anywhere else that we learn things. It's also a place to catch up on things that we thought maybe we didn't need to know, but then our jobs shifted under us. These are asynchronous online courses, usually 4 weeks, some are 6 weeks. The new courses start every month. You can learn more about us at libraryjuiceacademy.com. The second arm of what we do is Library Juice Press, where we publish books and journals on critical angles of LIS, again, writ large. We're all librarians, archivists, everybody in the field. We have great titles coming out all the time. We've got a very strong backlist. We are an imprint of Litwin Books, so you can learn more about us at litwinbooks.com. And then finally, what brings us all together today is our third arm, Library Juice Connections. This is a place where we can bring everyone together, talk with authors from Library Juice Press about all the things that they're publishing and thinking about. We can talk to people from Library Juice Academy or the instructors about what their topics are and what they're passionate about. And then we also bring people together by community focused and community initiated topics, kind of like what we're talking about today. So not really tied to any of the other arms, but just something that a lot of people in the field are interested in and want a space to talk about. So Library Juice Connections is really providing a space for that. We have a lot of events happening all the time, and we have a strong collection of recorded events, and you can find all of that at libraryjuiceconnections.org. And that is everything I wanted to say about Library Juice. At this point, I'm going to invite our speakers to briefly introduce themselves. And Elizabeth, I'll bounce it over to you first, if you don't mind.
Hello. Thank you so much, Sophie. What a pleasure to be with each of you today. My name is Elizabeth Rivera. I am an information professional who has practiced as an academic librarian, as an archivist, and as an information professional. So I hit all three of the buckets that Sophie has talked about today. And it's a real joy to have this conversation of what holistic management is, and I'm thankful to be here. Thank you, Sophie.
Helen, would you like to introduce?
Yeah. Okay. So hi, I'm Helen Rimmer, and I'm over in the UK. And I was a library director at the University of Westminster before I stepped aside to become a coach and trainer. And I specialise in kindness and wellbeing at work. I did a PG cert in the psychology of kindness and wellbeing at work, and I'm also a burnout coach. So I'm all about holistic management and how to make things better. I'm also the author of The Kind Librarian and the upcoming Kindness Toolkit, which you can get through bookshops, but ALA included. So there you are.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nisha.
Hi everyone, my name is Nisha Modi. I am a certified life coach and a certified speech language pathologist and a former librarian. I worked in health sciences librarianship as well as being the director for the network of the National Library of Medicine for the Pacific Southwest region. And now I coach folks and I do facilitation work specifically around trauma-informed care and well-being in libraries, which absolutely takes that holistic management approach. Thank you.
Thank you all for that. I really appreciate it. And I wonder, speaking of holistic management, that being the topic and everything, I wonder if each one of you would be willing to say a little bit in your own words about what that means. And Helen, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yeah, definitely. So holistic management for me is about making sure that you're managing the work whilst not forgetting the humans, and equally supporting the humans without losing sight of the work. So the whole team, the whole system, and taking a systemic look at it. So systems, not blame. That well-being isn't a nice extra. That I see it as part of how good work becomes possible. And underpinning that, of course, is kindness, because people are supported, but you still have boundaries that show that expectations are clear. And very much that whole person leadership. So people bring energy, confidence, fear, all sorts of intersectionality around different things, neurodivergence, grief. They turn up with everything that's going on. And holistic does not mean vague or endlessly accommodating. It means being honest, compassionate, and clear, and thinking about the whole, not just obviously holistic, thinking about the whole, but the whole person as well as the whole service. Because sometimes if our empathy goes into overdrive, we sometimes forget about the whole service if we end up focusing on one person, and that can be sort of the downside sometimes of. But kindness means trying to balance everything. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Elizabeth, I'm curious the same question to you. How do you think about it?
I think about holistic management as encompassing the product and the people. You don't let either fall, right? And so often management historically has elevated the product above the people and missing that the people are the ones who run the systems. And so one key word that comes out in my mind when I think of holistic management is delayed gratification. In the United States, we continue to produce a product at the expense of the people. Whether you're a librarian or a nurse, both are trauma-informed professions. And there have been studies that showing over and over that harm is coming to the people when we say, oh, we have to keep out another product, whether it's a digital product for another digital collection, or it's a finding aid for an archivist, or it's more books that are cataloged from that librarian, or more meetings, right? Instead of recognizing that the people who are conducting this work are people. And so maybe a good example of seeing what is holistic management is a manager who doesn't take credit for the team at the expense of the team. So for example, if the manager neither came up with the idea nor implemented the work, that the manager isn't the one to say, I did this, right? That we put this back and say, the team did this, look at this, right? And I think when you begin to give credit to the people who conduct and do the work, then you're demonstrating what is holistic management in a very tangible way, right? So delayed gratification in that sense comes out when you recognize that that manager, instead of taking immediate gratification for his team or her team, to be able to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to take this for me. I'm going to put this where it needs to go. That's holistic management, and why delayed gratification goes so hand in hand with that.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Nisha, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for sharing. It's been so helpful for me to even hear you and respond as well and share my take. For me, holistic management in general, not just in libraries, but holistic management is really using that word, the whole. And I really think a lot about interdependence, about how we can't, everything and everyone is dependent on each other. And what does that include? That includes our whole selves. And one thing I often say in my coaching and facilitation work is that the personal is professional. That doesn't mean you have to bring your whole personal life in, but ultimately that ends up happening to some degree because you're bringing your childhood, you're bringing the way you respond, the way you communicate, the way you were educated, your identity markers, all of that into the workplace, and that can't be avoided. So being holistic is regarding that and understanding how that is going to impact you as a manager, the people who work for you and report to you, as well as different team dynamics, and also understanding that that's happening with the people that you work with too. So absolutely, echoing what everyone's saying, definitely people over product. Really thinking about that from a trauma-informed lens, of course, is what I always think is that, our actions, our words, and also the things we don't say and the things we don't do, the things we're not transparent about, end up impacting everyone else to some degree. So how are you not just being holistic for the team that you're working on, but even for yourself if you are a manager? That's what I always say. Trauma-informed care actually starts with being trauma-informed with yourself. But that also means understanding what power dynamics are, understanding what your nervous system is, what's happening within your nervous system. And that to me is looking at the whole, not just like, okay, this is what we have to do. This is the roles and responsibilities. I think we can get stuck in the like to-dos and the tasks as opposed to what's behind the task, who's coming into this task. So yeah.
I love that. Wow, I feel like a lot was wrapped up in that. And I want to pause just for a second, just for our attendees today, just to remind everybody, one, that the chat is open. So please do feel free to use that and or the Q&A function here in Zoom if you have any comments or questions. And if they're immediately related, we'll do our best to work them in. Otherwise, we'll have time at the end to get to as many as we can. But yes, please do feel free to jump in virtually as you see fit. And I would love to so hearing about this type of management spoken from each one of you. Nisha, I wonder if I could stay with you for a moment first, because I would love to hear your thoughts on this, right? So every management is a thing in every industry, every job. So since we're thinking about this type of management in libraries, I'm just sort of curious your thought. How do you see this applied specifically to those of us in libraries and archives and information studies?
Absolutely. I always think, and of course I'm going to get this wrong, but of like Ranganathan and the 5 laws of library science. And, actually my internet finally started working. So I'm going to look it up. The one about like, yeah, a library is a growing organism, that one. I'm like the one where it's like expansive, right? And how it's constantly changing. And I do think that that is something that differentiates libraries from a lot of other organizations. And that's coming from me. I used to work in a corporation. I was an IT consultant. I was an IT recruiter. I was, a speech therapist. I've worked in schools, hospitals. I've worked in a lot of different settings. And one thing that I noticed in libraries is that absolutely, I agree with Ranganathan in that it is a growing organism. So how are you is that holistic management also addressing the fact that the structure of the library itself, I know there's not just one type of library, but if we are talking maybe about a generic academic or public library, for example, there's a lot of things that are happening. As someone who I was more instruction and reference, I didn't know what was happening in technical services. I didn't know what was happening in archives. Like that wasn't my role. And yet there is that interdependence and there is that connection. So how, as a manager, are we taking all of that into consideration? And I don't think that it's necessarily, if you're a manager for, special collections or a specific unit, I don't think that like it's your responsibility. But I do think as a manager, understanding how everything is, there's impact in every way matters. And also just knowing that patrons are coming to you with questions for as a service. It's not like a corporation. You're not selling something. And I do think that that absolutely differentiates libraries, because it isn't something that typically, they're not necessarily customers. I know some people use the word customer, but if you are using the word patron or user, they are coming into this space thinking, okay, well, this is a place that has something for me and I want it. And how are you regarding yourself in that process? Is it something that is relational or is it transactional? And I think that very often in library work, we see ourselves constantly in service, which can lead to a lot of martyrdom and lead to a lot of what Fobazi Attar had coined as that vocational awe, where we are constantly in service and we forget ourselves, which is forgetting the whole. One thing that I always tell my clients when I start a coaching session with them is that they are whole and complete as they are. And I think that's something that is important for library workers to remember, because, myself coming from a speech therapy background, I also was in a highly feminized service profession. So I saw this happen there too, people constantly burning themselves out, sacrificing their own needs because they wanted to serve and, that which would just lead to burnout. And burnout typically is something that happens when you actually are passionate about what you do, when you actually do care about what you do, because your identity and your desires and those passions are so connected to it. So you overwork. So that's just, a trend that I know, like, I'm not going to be alone in saying that I've seen in libraries. So especially like thinking about the interdependence of all that growing organism, as well as what does it mean to be holistic when you are in a profession that other people see as a service, and also thinking like, if it was holistic, how would I view that in a way that we are partners, not service providers only.
Yeah, yes, thank you for that. Helen, I would love to welcome you to add anything.
I was just reading the comment. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Nisha. And interestingly, I was having a conversation with someone who works in our health service around burnout, and she'd found Fabasi's article, and she was like, "Have you read this?" I was like, "Of course I have." But she's now using that terminology. So her words are spreading. That terminology is now being used in our NHS, our health service. So there is a real correlation between, and something I notice a lot in my clients is, my librarian clients, is also a feeling of, well, everybody's got it hard. Everybody is struggling. I'm overworked, but I can't tell my manager because they're already overworked. And that sort of ripples on. So this martyrdom, this feeling that we owe something, just ripples on and on through the levels. And that's why I'm interested in that compassion fatigues part. Actually, what are we asking people to do and be compassionate about, whether they're a manager who's being compassionate about their team as well as their users, or is it someone on the front line who is just absorbing so much, but then possibly not sharing it up or along, because they also feel that's going, like, everybody's going through it. And how we start to reframe our roles so that people aren't burning out because they are exhausted from being too compassionate and taking on too much. And it's a big interest, although with my psychology hat on, it's actually empathy fatigue really, because compassion is it's a pro-social rather than empathy, which actually does things to our brain and actually makes a difference. I've been listening to a friend of mine doing a PhD in compassion. She's like, it's empathy fatigue. But we can use the term compassion fatigue because we understand what it means. But it is that feeling the feelings of other people and just absorbing it. And librarians are burning out left, right, and centre because of it. Yeah. And so the holistic management around that is making sure that the well-being is part of that, and those conversations happen and boundaries are reinforced. Yeah.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
The silence is what is often ignored, and often the managers are not having these conversations, right? Because we tend to think, oh, someone else is going to say this, or that's not my job. I've seen that often is that's that person, right? They in libraries will turn a broken system onto a person, that the person is the problem, rather than seeing that the dysfunction within an entire profession is causing the people who are having this vocational or needing that compassion are lacking that opportunity to have those conversations. And the best people to have the conversations and to initiate the conversations are those holistic managers who see their whole team and as people who are in need, and then to recognize what are those roles and how do we do that, not at the expense at any means of the work that needs to be done, right? But the people who are working in the libraries need to be cared for in the same way that the people who are coming to use the libraries are cared for. Otherwise, that we will continue to perpetuate this system of seeing the people who come into a library as customers. And when you approach a service-oriented profession where the people who are coming to use that service as customers, your approach and how you treat the people who are running the library is different and the people who are coming into the library is different, right? So we need that relational model rather than this transactional model that is so apparent right now.
Yeah, perfect. And Elizabeth, I'd love to stick with you for a second because you sort of mentioned what it is that you would see a holistic manager doing. And I would love to, so, we started off with a broad definition of what this type of management is, scope it down a little bit more to what it might look like in libraries. And now I'd like to scope it down even further. Like, what sort of skills would somebody have? And I'm thinking about a lot of us have had management positions in the past and or have them now, listening to this conversation. So what sort of skills would you expect to see in somebody who's able to take this on?
One thing that comes to mind immediately, Sophie, was that a manager doesn't just show up when he or she needs something, right? That they engage with the team, not just at formal meetings, but at the water fountain conversations, right? They make themselves available to the people. I've seen it at R1 schools and R3 schools, everywhere in between in corporate, right? That boss who just shows up at the meeting and there's only that relationship there and it's very formal. And if you actually need anything, it better not have any inconvenience for the boss, right? And what I mean specifically is if you think about the way corporates were run in the United States in the 1980s and 90s, right? The ceiling hits where the people at the highest level don't really know what's going on and they're fine not knowing what's really happening as long as things are running smoothly. And this mindset is what creates events that ultimately happen, such as Enron, right? It creates a culture of what's okay and how we have no morals. We show up, make the money meet, and everybody's fine. But if they find out something is really going awry, it's that person causing that problem. It's not the culture, it's not the broken system, right? And so for making simple skills is that the boss is not just at a meeting. They show up and they say hello, right? That without even needing anything, right? Just to make that conversation to say, hey, Sophie, I see you today, without saying I see you, right? To show up and smile. With Helen, to be able to have this kindness. Kindness doesn't just come one time, right? I believe that Helen is kind when I see a pattern of behavior, right? And so those skills come through consistent behavior demonstrated. It's not a one time or I've planned for this, I'm ready to be kind, I can be kind right now. But if you walk into my office when I say I have open door policy, and I'm not really ready for you, those are the kinds of skills that I'm seeing lacking in many managers, right? To be able to really show up and be present without being inconvenienced or feeling as if you're going to make me look bad if you have a problem that I have to do something with, right? Does that make sense, Sophie?
It does, and I appreciate that. I think that gives it a much more concrete nature. And just to sort of mix the flow up a little bit, Nisha, I'm going to jump over to you just to ask if you have anything to add to the types of skills that you'd expect to see that applied to this type of management.
Yeah, one thing that I talk a lot about are relational skills. So that really includes, and I feel like I need to talk to you, Helen. I really want like that compassion versus empathy. I was like, ooh, that's juicy. So I think that's really, really interesting. But I teach relational skills like empathy, empathic listening, congruence, unconditional positive regard. That's how I learned it from my teacher. And just having those relational skills, I think, are really important. And I always joke, but I'm also serious that, I'm like, I don't know why we learned calculus and we never learned relationship skills in school. Like we really didn't learn these skills. And I really think that most organizations would be better equipped. But also I know why, because all education and all that is going to be in service to the systems that we have, including capitalism, including ones that are more product oriented. And just like Elizabeth had said, that not considering the person. And it really takes intention and awareness to say like, okay, I don't want that. I also think that there's something, the skill of knowing your values and what those mean really is important. And I know a values exercise might be like, oh, whatever, you know, but I have noticed I facilitated something for a very small nonprofit once. We only had 9 or 10 people. And when they actually discussed their values with each other, they were actually shocked after working with each other for years in close quarters, what they learned about each other that they didn't know, and how that they shared about how that's going to help them going forward. Because, you know, values can help shape your goals, values shape your decisions, and they can. But having the skill to know, okay, I have to make this decision. Does this align with my values? Even asking yourself that question doesn't always happen. And what usually happens is people respond from a survival or trauma response. Like, I need to protect myself. I need to, you know, I don't want to get in trouble. I think, you know, Elizabeth had said that as well. Like, you know, I need to watch out because I want to maintain my power, even if it's not intentional necessarily. Even if that really isn't according to your values, your survival responses will often override that. So you have to be able to have the skills, of course, also to access safety in a moment when you are actually safe. If our nervous system responses, fight, flight, fawn, dissociating, those exist for a very good reason when we are actually in danger. And I think a lot of us operate in that way because we haven't been taught otherwise, when we can actually access a sense of safety in a situation that might be uncomfortable. There might be discomfort, but that doesn't mean it's actually a survival situation a lot of the times. And I think there's a discernment to have about, is this actually unsafe, or am I perceiving it as unsafe? And that might mean that you need to take a moment and take a break, and that's okay. But it's also giving yourself that allowance that I deserve to take a break right now. I deserve that space so that I can access safety for myself and respond to the situation in a way that it can be aligned with my values and, you know, is regarding myself as a human being and what's happening within my mind and my body and the stories that are coming up, instead of ignoring them and pushing down, which leads to a lack of communication, which leads to people, you know, just being out of integrity, even if that isn't their intention. Because I think there's definitely folks out there who are just out of integrity, are not relational, power hungry. But I think there's a lot of that in between, where there's people who really mean well. And a lot of these responses come out that they aren't aware about. So I think really understanding how to access safety, those relational skills, are critical for this type of work.
That's amazing. Ellen?
Yeah, so agree with everything. Something that my first thought was the importance of building the psychological safety. So building on from what Elizabeth was saying, that water cooler moments, that trust is having what Amy Edmondson coined as psychological safety, but the ability to make mistakes and not be punished for them, the ability to raise an issue or ask a question and not be put down, to fail and be okay, is all really important. And sometimes I see managers who forget that. They forget their important role. I completely agree with what Elizabeth said, the difference between the manager who just turns up at a meeting. They're not going to build that space, and things will be all right if things are all right. But we've seen it in quite a lot of our public services over here. We've had some big scandals where clearly I'm like reading it and I'm like, A, this is obviously a very toxic environment, and B, there's no psychological safety here. Because if there was, people would have raised questions, they'd have changed processes, they would have asked questions. And instead people get very defensive and they block things. And then so as a manager, if you can have those little moments, and in kindness, it's the small things are the big things. So something like making a cup of tea for someone, you know, in the UK we drink tea, making a coffee, but saying, hi, how are you? Oh, do you want me to go get you? You're busy. Shall I go get you a drink or something like that? That's all going to help those little moments. Remembering people's names, remembering something like, oh, they were going to see their mum at the weekend because it was her birthday. Things like that are all little things. And if you need to make a note about things to do it, that's fine, because nobody's going to know that bit. But as Elizabeth said, if you say you've got an open door policy, then you need to be able to go, hi, and smile and just compartmentalize whatever stressful thing you were doing looking at it. And I think all of that is key to what builds up, and it builds up the diversity and inclusion. And also, I'm reading the comments at the same time because I saw about a difficult job market. We've got a horrible job market over here at the moment. And what I'm hearing now is more competition between people, where people would have helped each other get jobs. They're all now like worried in case they're going to be going for the same, like worried about asking someone to help, because what if they're going for the same job? Because there's people who would have walked into interviews and got a job who aren't. And I'm seeing that, like, how do you stop the erosion of the culture? Because the culture is what happens when someone phones in sick. It's what happens when someone's cat's died and they need a bit of time. It's those sort of moments that speak far more than a poster on the, or, you know, on the wall. It's how you deal with a leave request that actually doesn't need to be a leave request because they don't need a, you know, they're going to the dentist, and actually is there a way of you allowing that without it being, you know, a whole day's leave? Things like that can all be, and sometimes that culture is out of our hands, you know, the system sort of above us. But if there are little things you can do, like say to someone, look, you've just had bad news, head off, you know, go home early. Things like that will all help. So it is very much those small things, because with kindness, it always comes back to kindness, but it ripples out. And so if you are kind to yourself, so if you're modeling the good behavior, for example, saying, you know, actually I'm ill, I'm not coming in, or I need a moment, I'm having a bad day, actually that all is rippling out to your team who are witnessing it, and they will then repeat that and repeat it. And you will feel it, because kindness releases oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. So it's going to make you feel better, and you're much more likely to repeat it. So if you do little acts of kindness, people are likely to see it and then repeat it. And witnessing it is going to repeat it, not just people who are actively practicing it. People will just naturally do something kind without even thinking about it. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And Helen, let me stick with you for a second. I had in my notes before this started, I was planning on asking what the barriers to this type of work would be, because it was hard to imagine anyone who is, maybe it's just my own being naive, but it's hard to imagine anyone who is in a management position to be like, well, I don't want to do this, like I don't want to be kind, you know what I mean? So I'm wondering, like, what is it that would keep somebody from
Yeah.
doing it? And I feel like we touched on this a little bit with the sort of fear response and
Yeah, exactly that. Fear response, the lack of psychological safety, so feeling that they can't model it. So, you know, that goes back to the wider system. Feeling there's a bit of groupthink, like actually, if you work in an organization where it's a bit Wolf of Wall Street, then actually it's going to be really hard for you to do big actions, but you can always find little things to do. But the biggest barriers I see with holistic management, with spreading kindness, and it is the most difficult thing actually I've ever had to do, was actually become like really consciously bring kindness into my leadership when I was leading, is because people perceive it as weakness. So they might see it as, well, you're being a bit soft here, or that's not how we do things, because we work, you know, all the hours God sends, when actually a kind thing is to put boundaries in for people and to actually say work your hours and then go home, because they're going to be, people are so much better when they've had a rest, because rest is productive, and when they've had time to do so. In burnout, there's the idea of your opposite self. And so if you do things that use another part of your brain to what you're using day to day, you will be less likely to burn out. So encouraging people to play an instrument, go and play sports, read poetry, or just watch TV, but something that's completely different, and making sure people have time for that will help. But the barriers are often systemic. It's not being modelled above. And the question I get asked most when I do talks on kindness is, we love this, but our senior management won't. And they will think that this is a waste of time and money. And actually, that's where sort of collecting some data around it comes. Actually, I've been doing, I don't know, I've been doing something, I can't think off the top of my head, but I've been doing this way of managing, and actually our sickness has gone down because I'm actually allowing people to inhabit their places themselves, or our customer satisfaction has gone up because people are happier. For example, actually, do people need to be on the desk all day? Can they have breaks? Because some places still do 9 hours on the desk. Well, actually, no, you need breaks and you need time to go and rest and recover. And actually, then picking that data and then going, I think this is, trying to find a causation can be really, really powerful there, because it's finding the language that speaks upwards. So yeah, I don't think anyone sets out not to be kind, but I think the systems sometimes don't let them be kind. And also, we as librarians are people pleasers, and people often avoid conflict. And one of the kindest things you can do is have that difficult conversation really early. When you spot a mistake or you spot something that needs to be changed, actually have the conversation, practice doing it, do it kindly. Then you're going to nip these things in the bud. Because they can ripple out as well. But if you can nip it into the bud, then it doesn't escalate. Whereas so many teams I come into and I thought, if you've made this difficult decision a year ago, well, you wouldn't be in the mess you'd be in now. And it's because we tend to be avoiding quite conflict avoidant. And I don't mean, having fights in the library, but actually being prepared to have those difficult conversations, because they're often the kindest thing you can do. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Elizabeth, would you like to take the same question? I'm curious from your perspective.
When you think about those difficult conversations that Helen is talking about, that you can identify what both people who are participating in this difficult conversation are coming with, right? And that you address what it is you need to discuss and why you're discussing it, right? So you name things, and we make sure that we're using the same vernacular so that we can communicate correctly, so that whether I'm talking to Helen or I'm talking to Sophie, I'm going to make sure that I'm not just getting nods, but they're saying back to me, right, what's going on. That's also being kind, to make sure that the person hears as they listen, and that the person has communicated the desired intent, right? That's something that I've seen over and over in libraries, that whether they're in the management positions at the senior level or a new librarian, that communication is not quite there, right? Maybe it's because, as Helen said, that we're risk averse when we think about conflict, instead of recognizing my showing up as a full person is intending for you to be able to show up, and we can do that best when we communicate clearly, when we have empathy before assuming, right? That's an important aspect. And then that we listen fully before we necessarily jump to make corrections, right? It might be that the person has tried to communicate something and that's totally not what they actually meant to say, right? This could be on a big thing or a little thing, but if we don't take time to fully listen and then communicate back, we miss. And so this awareness is important before we make these firm judgments. And that's often what's missing at these highest levels, right? Because it's easier just to show up and practice this same system, because it's very difficult to learn how to communicate to the highest level in a way that they understand and still prove the library's worth and value. Libraries have been doing this for a very long time, whether you're at an R1 school or at a liberal arts institution. Libraries have constantly had to fight to prove their worth and value. They're expected to do much with little. They're expected to perform and produce and be scholars, but we're not going to give you the same sabbaticals that we give other professors in our institution, even if the money is there, right? Maybe we say, oh, we value service more than you're producing good scholarship, so we're not going to provide those spaces. It happens lots of different ways there, but this empathy before assumptions, listening before correcting, and awareness before judgment, those are the three concise things that I would argue we need to practice within librarianship.
Yes, exactly. Nisha, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. In terms of barriers, I think that some of the barriers, I mean, Elizabeth and Helen absolutely shared so many of them. And I think I love her suggestion, like for the people and the managers that just won't listen or don't care. I mean, there's frankly people who just don't care. And if you don't care, they're not going to take action, is really speaking their language and gathering that data and like seeing how you could translate, and actually had a group of people at a university, a group of librarians, I should say, not no one in management, write a proposal to their management to buy my course as an institution. And they were able to, because they gathered data, they created a whole thing. And like I looked it over, but they did that work. And they literally did the same thing that Helen said, to say, okay, here's the data. This is why this can help. And this is why you should invest in it. And it worked. And I was just like really thrilled to see that type of collaboration, which goes to show that that is possible. So I think some of the barriers are, just not knowing that there can potentially be that possibility. And I think some of the barriers, let's just be real right now, is the world. Like there are a lot of really hard things happening in the world right now, and it is impacting all of our well-being. And I think just really being honest about that, being transparent, and really not having expectations of people to perform at a level that they would have in the past. The economy is really bad. People, even if they want to leave a job, are afraid to, because they don't think they'll get another one, because it's very, very difficult right now. I feel like every higher education institution I've talked to is in a budget crisis. These are very real material constrictions and fears. Talking about psychological safety, people have every right to feel unsafe in that way when their livelihood is potentially at stake, when they might not be able to pay their bills or put food on the table. I mean, I've been joking about this, but I'm scared to go to the grocery store lately. Like the prices just keep getting more and more. It's just like, I don't know how people are living. And I think that's a very, very real barrier that deserves a lot of compassion for ourselves and for others, to say like, hey, what are my expectations right now? And is that realistic given what is happening? Are we just going to be like that dog in that comment saying everything is fine when it's not? And how can we recalibrate those expectations in ourselves and others? And I think that is one of the biggest barriers lately with, especially in the United States, with the government and the administration. Locally, people are suffering in different ways. With budgets, even, whether it's like locally in someone's area or within the library itself, whatever's happening is now exacerbated by everything that's happening in the world. And, really wondering, like, asking yourself, like, is this thing I'm doing as urgent as I think it is? And sometimes there is urgency and it's completely legitimate. But I think, because of everything that's happening, it just heightens all of those survival responses I've talked about, all that fear and everything, in a way that's very honest and very legitimate. So how are we, as managers, like actually responding to the material and actual safety barriers that are happening in the world right now that are impacting all of us? Yeah, I want to take a big breath. If anyone wants to take a breath with me, because it's really heavy. It's very heavy. And I don't think it's fair for us to expect ourselves to dehumanize ourselves in a way. And so that's the main barrier I want to talk about. I mean, there's so many barriers, time, like capacity, all of that. But I think looking at the larger systemic, ideological, material, economic things that are happening right now, I think it's fair for us to say it's okay. You have permission to slow down, and giving yourself permission as well.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I deeply appreciate that. And it's a really nice segue with thinking about the time that's remaining. I was going to ask, and I guess I'll still go ahead and do it. I'm very curious about, Anisha, your comments helped us again with the scope of this, right? So we're thinking about individual settings, and then we're thinking about individual skills for individuals. And then you helped us remember that there's a lot of systemic things going on. There's a lot, we still have to live in this world, and that's stressful. So I sort of wonder, I would love to hear if y'all are willing to share what's bringing you hope around this topic these days, if anything, and it's okay if nothing. But Nisha, I don't know if you have anything to add, or if you'd like to for me to come back to you later. But if you have anything on this topic, I'd love to hear.
Absolutely. I think it's so important. I read something a while ago, and I'm not going to get this right, but it's like the word despair actually, it's like like away from hope. So it's kind of like they're part together. Like when there is despair, like it's kind of like black and white. You can't have one without the other. And I think that that's really important. And what gives me hope right now is things like this, like having these conversations, because I think the more that we like literally our brain gets the reinforcement. And I love, Helen, what you shared about like doing something else to activate that part of your brain. It's something that as a speech therapist, when I worked with people with like brain injuries, it's like you can build new neural networks. These are things that are possible. And I actually just like quickly want to share an example is that I'm actually writing a memoir right now, and I've just been in a stuck place. And so the other day I decided to just like write fiction. I haven't written fiction probably since grade school, right? And I just decided to do it, and I did that, and it felt so good. And then the next day I started writing my memoir again after I hadn't been doing it for weeks, you know? So that absolutely is possible. So there are ways to, you know, recruit not just parts of our brain, but connect with each other and remember that we probably have more resources than we think, but it's so easy to focus on the constriction that we're having in our bodies, in our lives, in the world, and not remember that there are places that we can probably access safety. And that gives me hope because I know it's there, and we just have to have the awareness and the guidance to be able to find it, to be able to offer that to ourselves. So I absolutely have hope. Does that mean, you know, that the ideal world I dream of is going to happen? I don't know. I'm also a very realistic person. I think being realistic along with being hopeful, like those two things can exist at once, because I don't think just because, you know, maybe there's like data, for example, about the climate that like, oh God, it's like impending doom. I don't think that means that we don't do anything. I think that we're humans who have will, and that will is going to go towards something, and that impacts other humans too. And that interdependence and that connection with other people is literally what helps us survive. Like we are social beings. And so how, you know, I always think about how actions speak louder than words. How is our action today going to be not just in service to hope, but in service to our values and ways that we can move forward, that not for the performance of other people, but for the actual intention and integrity of ourselves, in knowing that being in integrity can support others as well.
Thank you for that. Helen, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm just going to share a link. So one thing, going back to witnessing kindness, is actually looking for kindness spotting, looking out for the good things people are doing, even if the world is on fire. And again, it's proven to improve your well-being. And this is my friend Sarah's project, where she shares stories about kindness, all sorts of different ones, from across the UK and across the world. So if anyone's got a story of kindness they want to share with her, she would love it. And Time for Kindness. And sometimes if I do feel, you know, the news is getting me down, going to the supermarket and everything's really expensive, you know, we've got no money left at the end of the month type thing, actually sitting and looking through Sarah's stuff can really help. And we can do it in our own organisations. We can have kindness walls, we can check in with people, and at the beginning of a meeting say, would anyone like to share any stories of kindness that have happened in the service this week, this month, this team, or whatever? And that can be those building blocks, because even in the worst times there is kindness happening, and bravery, and things that people are doing that are trying in their own way to make the world better. And conversations like this is all really good, because it's really easy to, as Nisha was saying, feel like everything's against you because we've got no control. And that goes back to thinking about what we can control, those circles of control. You know, we can't control politics, we can't control the world, you know, we can't control the weather, but we can influence things within our own sort of circle, the people we can reach to, the organisations we work in or with, and we can only really control our own actions. And if we do positive things and do kind things, at least when hopefully, you know, the world changes, we can look back and think we did at least keep spreading some kindness, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the powerful thing, is notice where it is good and where it is kind. And something I often say to people when they're working in workplaces, and like Nisha was saying, they can't leave, you know, they're stuck there because they can't afford to leave and they can't handle a job, is at least at the end of the day, note down something good that happened today. And it might be, actually, there were biscuits in the kitchen. It could be someone smiled at me. But if you do that, it will help you stop letting it all get on top of you, whilst acknowledging the toxicity, the awful things that might be happening where you're working. But at least look for a little glimmer of happiness. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that link. Elizabeth, any hope?
The hope I have is hearing from professionals who care and spend time in reflection, because it's the people who practice reflection who are then able to go back in the moments when the tendency might be to react in that fear and flight mode, to come back and smile and pause and open that door, whether it's to a colleague who historically has been loud and rambunctious and not productive, but maybe that's just the mask that that person has chosen to wear, right? And to see that person as a human being who needs support, because we are human beings, not human doings, and to have that reflection. And so that gives me a lot of hope to see leaders who practice that and pass that on to others.
Thank you all so much for this conversation. We're coming up at the top of the hour. So I'll just take this opportunity to say thank you again. And to remind everybody that the recording will be up on the Library Juice Connections website. We'll send a link out when it's ready to everybody. We'll also have links to resources discussed, as well as our links to the resources provided by our speakers today. Yeah. Deep breath, everybody. I really, really, really appreciate this. I appreciate everybody who came to hear this and everybody who came to talk about it. I hope you all have a wonderful day.